Hello and welcome to Pods Like Us. I'm Martin Quibell, known to my friends as Marv, and this time I am talking with Xander Z and
Xander Z.
Xander Z. It sounds like the sort of character that Vin Diesel would play in a film, maybe. And Jenna Stone from Xander and Stone's podcast. How are you both?
Good.
Yeah, we're doing great. We're covering all the time zones like we were chatting about. I'm in Asia, where it's going on for 10:15 p.m. And Stone, where are you?
Arizona, where it is going on 7:16 a.m.
And I'm in Nottinghamshire in England, where it is 2:16 p.m.
Nice. So we've got breakfast, lunch, and supper. We've got all the time zones represented here.
We have. We've all just finished eating.
We have. I had a good chicken burger.
Yes, I had a nice veggie-friendly sandwich.
Good on you. What did you have for breakfast, Stone? Shot of vodka.
As it should be.
If we're all being honest, I woke up, 30 minutes ago. So no food yet.
You haven't sent somebody to go and make the food for you then?
No, there's no one. There's no one.
Dear me, that must be really boring, especially with lockdowns and all the tier systems going on. So,
I have 2 full-time jobs and a podcast, so I rarely get bored. I miss bored.
Okay, so how did you both meet in the first place? Because you're from different time zones, and that's just interesting.
Yeah, so Stone, do you want to take this, or am I going to tell the story? Or are we going to share the story? Should I do a bit and then hand it over to you?
Yes, you tell it wrong, and then I'll correct you.
Okay, great. All right. So, so we'd both just been recruited by NASA, and no, okay.
That's facts.
Fact. No, so I prior to going into full-time podcast and producing, I worked in education recruitment, and Stone just said she has 2 jobs, and she is a fantastic educator and a wonderful teacher. Oh, and we'd booked a time to have a consultation call about Stone applying for teaching positions in China. So this is where Stone will tell you that she was about to stand me up for the call because she had done a couple of interviews that day already. And was going to just brush me off, but at the last minute decided, okay, I'll hop into this one last call. So we had the consultation call, and we were just talking about teaching in China and what it's like, and my experience of working here in China, and we kind of just really hit it off really, really well. And what is usually kept down to around like a 20-minute professional consultation call, talking about visa policies and how to go about applying for jobs and which jobs we have on our books that you might be interested in, turned into about a 45 minutes to an hour of us giggling and telling jokes and all sorts of things. So we kind of had this immediate chemistry and kind of hit it off from the very first phone call that we'd ever had. So eventually what happened is that Stone got a teaching position. This is by no means by my design, but it just happened to be in the same city that I live in. What a coincidence. So Stone got a teaching position at an international school, teaching drama. And of course, came and lived in the same city. And we kind of just, maintained and stayed in contact through the process until Stone arrived. And then we hung out a couple of times while you were here. Unfortunately, not enough, because you had arrived in, September of 2019. And then by December, was it December or January when you went to the Philippines for a holiday?
January for winter break.
Yeah. So for the winter break holiday, Stone went to the Philippines in January. And that was when all this COVID nonsense started happening. And unfortunately, China, of course, closed their borders, which meant that Stone was stuck in the Philippines. Now I feel like I'm telling your story, Stone. But Stone was stuck in the Philippines. And during that time, while I was in lockdown in China, and Stone was really having a hard time being locked down on a tropical island in the Philippines. How awful for you.
No idea.
We decided that we were going to start a podcast. Obviously with the idea that, this whole COVID thing is going to blow over in a week or two and everybody can come back and we'll continue doing the podcast. And then 1 month turned into 2 months, 2 months turned into 6 months. Eventually, Stone went back to the States, and I've obviously remained here in China. And we started doing the Xander and Stone podcast. Did I tell that story right? I feel like I told that story right.
You know, it's less it's less rom-com than I would have done it, but yeah, it's perfect. No, that was good. That was very impressive. Well done.
Thank you.
Really
You
good.
left out the month I had to go to South Korea for visa issues, so there was also that.
Yes, there was also the South Korea trip. Yes.
Yes. So, but we had got a few times actually, and
But not as much as we'd like to have.
No, of course not.
Mm.
But I'm gonna drag you here to America, so it's all good.
Yeah.
Okay, so how did the subject of the show come about then? How did you decide to actually do a show about the paranormal and how could I describe this? Strange sciences, shall we say?
Fringe sciences.
Fringe science, yep. Just
I'll
like
let
that really
Stone
good
answer this
television
one.
show. Yeah.
Well, frankly, it was Xander's idea. So
But I'll let you say that. I'll let you tell the people.
Xander said, "Will you please?" And he begged and he wept for me to do this topic with him. And I had enough strange experiences that had happened to me that I've always been very intrigued with this topic anyway. So it was a good topic for me too.
So I think what it comes down to as well is that we both kind of already had an interest in the paranormal, and like just like kind of supernatural, and exactly like Stone says, she's had a lot of unusual experiences in her life, and obviously we've exchanged these types of anecdotes and things through messaging and just chatting with each other. And I think just based on the like the rapport that we get going and kind of the fun that we have when we're talking about these things, I'm sure at some point there must have been one of us who said something like, "Oh my God, we should totally start a podcast. Like we should be like putting this on the air," type of thing. Just our regular kind of funny exchanges. So I think the origin of this, like why we decided to do the science and the supernatural, is we both kind of had an interest in the supernatural already. But being somebody who consumes an awful lot of podcasts, I listen to a lot of different paranormal podcasts. And one of the things that I felt that a lot of them were lacking is they lack like the alternative or the ulterior logical explanation as to what it might be. So there's a lot of paranormal podcasts out there that talk about ghosts, but very few of them offer you kind of the scientific rationale behind, well, it might not be a ghost. It could be like, a faulty gas line in your basement or something like that. Or your house might have black mold and you're actually hallucinating or something like that. And I think we kind of decided that we were going to bring it from that angle because it was kind of niche. It's not something that a lot of other podcasters or a lot of paranormal podcasters do. And it was just something that, it gave both of us kind of like a focus on something that we can go out, we can go and research, and then arrive at an episode with our findings from our research. And that is one thing that we don't do, is we don't tell each other. We obviously know what the topic is that we're going to be talking about that day, but we don't go into too much detail about the things that we're going to cover in today's episode with each other. So when Stone is telling me about the science, I'm hearing about her findings and her research for the first time while we're recording. And then the same thing is, she's hearing about the things that I've rummaged up online, that I researched for the episode as well. What gets challenging is when you're on like take number 3 of an episode, if you've messed up the first 2 or you think you can do better and you're doing another take, is to try and act surprised and try and act like you're hearing it for the first time, even though you've heard it for like 4 times now. But yeah, that's how we roll.
Yeah, it's interesting because you'll take the subject and you're basically doing a deep dive into it and what could actually be feasible scientific reasons for these things. A bit like when you did when you yourself, Xander, did the solo show about the unfortunately named Johannes Kuntius. You were going into all sorts of things, such as even the suggestion that perhaps the guy was actually in a coma, and that was sort of a realistic way of looking at the situation and the circumstances and all the information that you got.
Yeah, look, I think it's again, Stone usually does most of the scientific research and the scientific background. I think when it comes to who's got the more challenging job when it comes to the paranormal and the supernatural content that we do, I would definitely say that the more challenging of our two roles would be Stone's role, because there are some paranormal topics that just do not have a scientific explanation because they're so based on folklore or based on mythology or something like that. So, for example, we recently did an episode on mermaids, and you would be surprised. You would think, okay, mermaids, it's all just folklore. They come from the Greek folklore. They're mythical creatures that they're just not real. And then Stone will come and just present you with some scientific findings that she's got, where by the end of the episode, I was like, my God, it's quite possible mermaids could actually be a real thing. Like there is actually scientific basis for how they call them the aquatic ape, by the way, if anybody's wondering. But there is a scientific basis for how we could have things like mermaids on the planet. So I think, it offers a different perspective. It offers, I think, a more rational perspective to, like the paranormal and the supernatural. But also one of the things that I enjoy about it is that when you look at mythology and you look at folklore, there is often a seed of truth in there somewhere. So, again, another example again is, either the sleep paralysis or mermaids or things like that, where there are so many cultures around the world that have those beings as part of their mythology or as part of their folklore or as part of their belief system, that these, over civilizations that have never really had much contact with each other in history, not talking about recent times, their mythology and folklore obviously goes very far back in time, but they've got such similarities in their folklore, like mermaids, that you've got to think, okay, if so many different cultures have this in their mythology and their folklore, surely there must be a seed of truth in there somewhere.
Well, yes, yeah, you're making me into a believer, that's for sure. So I love the way that what you were saying was that when you do your research, you don't let each other know before the show what you've actually got, for the most part, because then that makes it more of a conversational show, which is more interesting to the listener. Because yes, okay, you do re-record occasionally if you mess up, but on the occasions when you're not, it's a natural reaction like you would have into a conversation.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that we seem to get a lot of compliments on. In fact, it was somebody who was chatting with me on social media just the other day, said that with a lot of podcasts that have co-hosts, people either have a preference for one co-host or the other co-host, or they feel that they prefer one co-host over another. And this person actually said, like, based on all the reviews that we can see online on things like iTunes and Apple and Spotify and all of those, there is no preference between Stone or I. What they love is the chemistry that we have when we're talking on the mics together, and that kind of ease of rapport and ease of conversation that we have. So I think, if anything, that is our biggest selling point as a podcast, is the fact that we kind of bounce off each other and we can joke with each other, and we make each other laugh and we keep each other engaged during the podcast. Sometimes, and this is where it comes down to the challenge of editing, is sometimes the tangents go on for a really long time, or sometimes the jokes get a little bit too wild. And then, we'll be messaging backwards and forwards saying, okay, remember I said that thing, cut that thing out. We can't put that thing on the podcast. Or remember I said that might offend people. Just take that bit out. So we do often have to whittle it down, but we have a load of fun in the process doing it. So, if anything, we're having a great time.
I've limited to Xander to only insulting or offending 5 different groups or people per episode. So
Yeah.
which 5 are you good with this time?
So what sort of research do you both do for the shows?
Stone, you're going to take this one for us.
I research the science, you research the supernatural. And we scour the internet mostly, I think.
Yeah.
And occasionally we had one episode where we did listener stories as well, which was really fun to do.
And I think, again, it just comes back to us both kind of having an interest in the topic that we're talking about. we recently, like I recently watched a documentary on the UFO phenomenon it's a new documentary called Phenomenon, actually. And Stone, you were watching the Dr. Stephen Greer disclosure documentaries recently. And we kind of had a bit of a back and forth about that, and talking about UFOs and disclosure, and aliens being on the planet and things like that. So a lot of the time we come with like just the bare findings or the bare research that we've got, like the facts and the information that we've got, the numbers and the statistics and general information. But a lot of the time it's also based on like just things that we know from content that we've consumed from other places before. And then when you do get there, Marv, when you do get sort of further into the episodes, especially about the orbs and ball lightning and shadow people, you're going to find that Stone has had a lot of experiences, and we can obviously draw on those experiences for the show as well. So it's not just necessarily facts that we found on the internet, but it's content that we've consumed, information that we've had because we've both been interested in the topic for a very long time. And then often just drawing from personal experience and things that have happened to us in life, or things that we've experienced in life that we can bring to the show as well.
Wow, I'm looking forward to those episodes. Wow. So what I meant by the research is, what resources do you use to actually research ready for the shows? When you've decided on a subject that you're going to discuss, what do you do then to research before the show?
Well, from my side, researching for the paranormal, there's an awful lot of paranormal content out there. And it's one of the things that surprised me about podcast hosting platforms is that you get to select the category that your podcast goes into. And with the sheer number of paranormal podcasts that there are available out there, none of the podcast platforms like Spotify or Apple have yet to create a category for the paranormal.
Okay.
So you end up finding a weird category like science fiction or spirituality or like health and lifestyle or whatever it might be. But within the amount of paranormal content that there is out there, the approach that I try to take is to find something that either hasn't been presented before, or maybe just some information from a different perspective. One of the things I like to do is I like to try and find the different information from different cultures from around the world. So let's take an example like let's take the sleep paralysis episode that you listened to as an example. Now, there's a lot of information about sleep paralysis in like psychology journals and on things like Reddit and Wikipedia and all of those places. So there's a lot of information about like the Western world's view of sleep paralysis. And we know that in like kind of Western, like Western paranormal circles, they might refer to it as the old hag, or like a sleep demon. But there are also different demons and different cultures different cultures that represent the sleep paralysis demon in different ways. So like how the Middle Eastern cultures look at it, how the Southeast Asian cultures look at it. One of my favorite ones actually, and this is something that Stone and I have joked about repeatedly, is the I think it was called the Pashmir, and that was the sleep paralysis demon that also functions as a housework demon, and it'll only torment you in your sleep if you don't keep your house clean. So if you're not pious and godly and following your religion and sticking to the rules of your religion, and if you're not cleaning your house on a regular basis, you're probably going to be terrorized by this demon in your sleep, and it lives in your house, and it kind of keeps an eye on you and whether or not you're doing your housework. And that's one of the Middle Eastern demons, and or one of the Middle Eastern ways that they explain the sleep paralysis demon. So there are these different cultural, anthropological perspectives from around the world about the different paranormal events or different paranormal entities and things like that. So that's kind of the approach that I try to take. There aren't, of course, always examples of these things. Not every single culture is going to have an explanation for sleep paralysis. But I do try and approach it from that type of a perspective.
And for me, because science is sometimes limited, the definition of science sometimes gets stretched a bit. So it'll go into parapsychology and and actually get the one we just recorded for the Kraken. National Geographic was heavily used, Live Science, NASA. So it just depends on which branch of science even has anything available for the topic.
Yeah. And I mean, come on, if it's on National Geographic, that is hard science right there. I mean, it's National Geographic. That is hard science.
Animal Planet.
Hard science. Hard science. If it's on
Animal
the Discovery
Planet
Channel, it's science.
The folk was Animal Planet.
Yeah, yeah.
And in the UK, anything presented by David Attenborough.
That is exactly what my line of thinking was going on. I was like, if it's narrated by David Attenborough, that is some hard science right there. Like that is the truth.
That guy knows his shit.
He really does. He really does.
So, what history have you both got in recording? Is this the first time, or have you had any previous experience with recording?
I had a radio show called Moxie, but it wasn't a podcast, but it was a radio show in the US.
And I've worked as and I still do freelance work as a voice artist as well. I'm known to get up on a stage and sing every now and then. So yeah,
amazing voice.
I'm no stranger behind the mic. I've worked in TV and film in South Africa as well. And of course, like I said, I've done voice artistry, but this is the first podcast that we've done.
Well, I know from conversations I've had with other people in the industry, it's like an extension of radio anyway.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah.
Just more niche.
In fact, I was just reading something, I think just yesterday somewhere online on one of the podcasting kind of newsletters, that they're saying that radio really is dying a slow and painful death. And they're losing a lot of their revenue through advertising and things because big companies are now choosing to rather advertise through podcasting than they are choosing through radio. And obviously it's because things like, the podcast episodes stay on a feed and anybody can go back and hear that episode multiple times. It'll be there for many, many years. Even if a podcast finishes or, they stop producing new episodes, people very rarely remove the podcast from the internet.
I bought.
Welcome back, Marv.
Hello.
Oh,
lost
sorry.
you there.
Welcome back.
Hopefully, it's got all that you were talking about there.
I'm not sure. We were wondering if you had just decided, okay, screw these two. Like, I'm bailing. These two are talking about your rubbish. Let's get out of here.
I have no idea what you've just talked to for the last about 2 minutes while I've been trying to work out what's going on.
Oh dear, it's probably the internet.
Yes,
always the internet.
It's always the internet. Damn it.
Damn the internet. What were we talking about? We were talking about podcasting. Yeah.
History, and podcasting, and now
yes.
It's an extension of. Oh yes, because you were saying that they were saying that radio stations aren't doing so well because people seem to be streaming podcasts more than they do listening to the radio.
Yes, and they're losing a lot of their advertising revenue as well.
Yeah.
But Stone, you made a good point before the call dropped as well. What did you say again?
Oh, I was saying that part of the reason Xander and I bonded so much on our first call is we were comparing notes about our family history and our professional history, which really was shockingly parallel, including I've also done voice work. I was also in theater in college and have done a lot of film and TV stuff. And the problem with a lot of those specific markets is that you always have a committee that's deciding what you have to do, and the money is usually not in your control. But with podcasting, you have this mass audience, you have 100% creative control, and it's low overhead. So you're investing your energy and sweat-equity into your own vision, and that is beautiful.
Yeah.
And also Tim Ferriss talks about this, that audio is a secondary activity. And so while instead of just, planning yourself and being totally focused in a multitasking society, it's really great with podcasts because people can cook or exercise or walk the dog while they're listening to your show.
Yeah. Like, I don't know about you guys, but when I'm planning or recording, I've kind of got it, like, you get that idea of who your ideal listener is, and that's the person you're kind of speaking to or the audience that you're kind of creating your episodes for. And I always picture somebody who's doing 100 other things while they're listening to our podcast. So like washing the dishes and, like you said, taking the dog for a walk or driving in their car or doing something else. Because that, and then one of the things that I always kind of think of the ideal listeners doing, and I think this just comes from the way that I consume a lot of podcasts, is falling asleep at night, and that would be where I listen to most of my podcasts, is lying in bed at night in the dark. And I think a lot of podcasters must love me, because I leave podcasts running all through the night. So I don't know if the podcasts I'm subscribed to get like great downloads every single day. It's because I'm leaving the episodes just on a loop, running all the way through the night. So I'll fall asleep to one podcast and wake up to the same host in the morning, about 15 episodes later, though.
Yeah, it's not the same as you get with Netflix on the television, because if you watch too much of that, you'll have a message that pops up asking you if you're still
there.
Are you actually awake or falling asleep watching this?
I always feel so judged by that message. Are you still watching? I'm like, yeah, I'm still here.
Stop watching. Stop judging. Yeah, okay, it's been 6 hours, but it's a good show, okay?
None of your business if I'm still watching.
What are you doing with your life? You're still watching this.
Exactly.
And the word still just starts to get more and more italicized. Like, you're still watching this?
Would you still be there? Yeah, it's a little embarrassing after a while, especially during COVID. You start feeling very judged. Like, oh, no.
They need an algorithm for that, don't they? Where if
they really do.
After so long, so originally you say, yes, I'm still watching it, or whatever. And then if it comes back again, it does it, but in capitals. Are you still watching? And then when it comes up again later, it's italics and bold. Still. And then
or just a message that comes up that says, like, take a walk, go outside, phone your mum.
Haven't you come out of lockdown yet? So how do you edit the show? How do you put it together?
Through the sweat of my brow, and the blood of my beating heart. I think I use the same editing software that most people would use, all the kind of standard ones. At the moment, I'm working with I'm using GarageBand for like all the final editing and putting all the sound clips and the theme tune and the mid-roll ads and the end-roll ads and all of that on. But it really is one of the most gargantuan tasks, I think, about doing a podcast. I think a lot of the times when people think, and I suspect this might be why podcasts fade after a few episodes. There's a thing called pod fade where people get, I think it's like episode number 7, and people, if you make it past episode 7, you're at a lower risk of pod fade. And then if you get to episode 15, you know that you've made it, and from there it's kind of smooth as sailing. But I think that is one of the places, or I think that's where the podcasters start to kind of bail out, is that sitting behind a microphone and producing the content or chatting with your co-host or reading the research that you've done or the funny story that you've got, that's actually the easiest part of podcasting.
It really
it's
is.
Everything else that comes either before or after that. Like the recording part, that's the fun bit. It's the editing at the end and the promotion at the end, and after you've edited and uploaded your episode, that's where the real work starts. And of course, researching for the episode as well. That's also where the real work goes in, because you got to be prepared for the recording. But the editing process is by far, I think, the longest process. I believe the rule of thumb is that for whatever the length of your recording is, basically multiply that number by 4, and that'll be how long it takes you to edit. I say that with my tongue in my cheek, though, because there are even shorter episodes. When I say shorter, for us, it's about 40, 50 minutes. But there are shorter episodes that can sometimes take you, a good 4 or 5 hours to edit, because you've got to either get out like what we call the juicy mouth sounds. So there's weird sounds before you start speaking that your mouth tends to make, or if you're stumbling over your words or done a lot of retakes or had to redo a bit, or if you, like today we recorded an episode where I just could not get through the phrase "tentacles wrapped around a sperm whale" without giggling like a teenage boy. And I had to retake that about 8 times. Those are the tough parts about editing, because you have to listen to it, you have to cut it out, you have to go back, you have to listen again, you have to listen again, you have to listen a 4th time, a 5th time. So if you've got an hour-long episode, the initial just sitting down and listening to it, that's going to use an hour, because you have to listen to the episode from start to finish in its raw format. Then you have to go and edit down or cut down all the long pieces that you want to just remove without actually doing any fine-tuning of it. So you have to go through it again, and that's another hour, and you have to make sure that you cut them in all the right places. So you can add, I'd say, another 30 minutes. So your second listen is about an hour and a half. And then you go through and you listen to your now slightly reduced episode, to do all the fine tuning to remove breaths or the juicy mouth sounds, or just kind of rearrange a few things. And that again, that's you're listening to another full hour plus the time that it takes you to do those tasks. So in all, a single episode can take anywhere between, I'd say, 4 to 6 hours to edit from start to finish. And to me, that is one of the most difficult and challenging parts about producing a podcast, is the post-production, all the things that you want to do, because you want it to be the best possible sound quality that you can offer. You want it to sound polished and put together. And so to be able to achieve that, you have to put in the hours, you have to put in the work. And again, if you're starting out as a new podcast as well, learning all the podcasting software, that's going to take a lot of time. God forbid, that you sort of mess up in one part and you don't catch it the first time around, and it affects the rest of your edit. There's been times when I first started out that I somehow ended up putting a fade in somewhere, and I wasn't sure how I'd put the fade in, but it essentially faded out the last 45 minutes of the episode, and I was left with 20 minutes of audio, and where's the rest of this hour? So I had to go back and try and find where the problem was, and of course that affected everything I'd edited after that. Editing, I'd say, is the most gargantuan task of podcasting, from my perspective.
So is there an actual structure that you follow in your show, or is it all free form?
What is Stone? Do you want to take this one?
If you've only listened to the first one, you wouldn't think that there's a structure. But usually we do our intro, and then we begin with the science and have our banter, and then we move into the supernatural, paranormal stories with Xander, and then we do our close. So that's the really nuts and bolts format.
Yeah. Okay, and you've also taken to actually having guests on the show occasionally and doing interviews. How do you sort those out, and how do you pick the people for those?
Well, so far we've had 3 guests on. The first one is an interview that we did with interview that I did with a psychic medium called Michael Gorley. He's in the US. And interesting story about that is, okay, so now we're going back to pre Xander and Stone podcast. I'd initially, at the beginning of the quarantine and COVID lockdown, I decided that I was going to make my own podcast called The Xander Zone. And I'd started kind of doing all the planning. I'd found a couple of guests that I wanted to interview, and I'd emailed this medium in the States called Michael Gorley, and I wanted to interview him for the podcast. And he completely agreed he's a really, really nice guy, completely agreed to the interview. And that was around back in, I think, January of 2020 when I interviewed him. And then, the COVID lockdown and the coronavirus thing started happening. And I kind of forgot about the interview, and it kind of sat on my desktop for a long time. And over the course of the next month or so, Stone and I started talking about starting the Xander and Stone podcast, and the idea of the Xander Stone podcast I kind of put to rest, because I wasn't quite sure how I was going to go about doing it by myself. And then I think, sometime in where that episode was released, I think one of us was either sick. I think I had gastric flu or something. Something came up, and basically we weren't able to record. And I was like, oh, hang on, I've got this interview with the psychic medium. I've got it on my desktop somewhere. Let me listen to it and see if it's good enough and if I can put it onto the podcast. And lo and behold, yes, it did. It saved. And I just quickly edited it together and put the new, put our intro onto it, and put our, theme music onto it, and incorporated it as part of this podcast, as part of this show, the Xander and Stone podcast. And then what we decided from there is that we can balance it out. So we didn't want it to seem like I was kind of doing all the interviews and kind of going at it alone. So Stone and I discussed it, and we said, okay, if you find a great guest that you can do an interview with, go ahead and do the interview with them, because there's nothing wrong with kind of highlighting you as the host for that episode. And then Stone got in touch with somebody that she's known for a while called Shiro Nobunaga. And I'll hand over to Stone to talk to you about that.
So I had a reading with Shiro 3 years ago, and it was phenomenal. And he was very well versed in other alien worlds and a lot of really spiritual topics. And so I asked him if he would be on the show, and he said, sure. And so that was my branch out by myself interview with Shiro.
And I'm just going to add as well that I had a chance to speak with him with Shiro for my birthday, because Stone bought me a reading with Shiro for my birthday, and he is hands down one of the most amazing humans to interact with on like a spiritual and intuitive counseling kind of a level. So if any of your listeners ever want to pick an episode to listen to, go and listen to the Shiro Nobunaga interview, because he is one of the most insightful people I've ever heard speak before. It is mind blowing.
And he's also so calm. There's something so calming and soothing about talking to him.
Yes.
I don't know what it is. It's magic.
Yeah. It is magic. He's magic. He is magic. Yeah.
So did you have actual set questions before meeting him, or were those questions and that discussion just free form as well?
I sent him the questions the night before, so and then threw a couple of extra ones in as we were going. But I think it's like any quote unquote scripted. I mean, you're going off book part of the time, depending on how the conversation goes. So even if you have the skeleton to it, it still is very organic the way the conversation flows.
Yeah. And I think also when you're interviewing with folks, I think a lot of what you're doing when you're sending them the questions ahead of time is just helping them to be calm in the interview. You don't want them to feel uneasy. I think it's one of those things that you and I know that I'm still working on it as an interviewer, is helping your guest to feel as calm as possible and as relaxed as possible so that they can open up. Not everybody's used to doing podcasts. Not everybody's used to speaking into a microphone. So I'm lucky that I've since interviewed a guy by the name of Brandon Stafford, who has like his own YouTube channel and things like that, where he does tarot card reading. So he's very used to that type of an interaction. But the interview that I did with the psychic medium with Michael Gorley, he was very insecure at the beginning of the interview. And I just said, I kind of stopped the recording, and we just kind of chatted for a little while. And then I secretly kind of hit the recording button again. So like once I could see that he was kind of feeling a little bit more at ease. And what I learned from that experience was that it helps to send your questions ahead of time, because it gives them like at least some time to prepare, and they don't feel quite so on the spot when they're being interviewed. But I will add that you do occasionally get the guest, and you will not find this episode on our feed anymore because I removed it. But you will occasionally get a guest who you've sent the interview questions to ahead of time, a good few days ahead of time. And their response to that was, don't worry, I'm not going to read them. I think I'll just spitball it. And that should be a red flag about any guest that's coming onto your show, is that they're not going to read the interview questions first. And I did an interview. I'm not going to mention any names. I did an interview with someone, and they were very much unprepared for the interview and had a very difficult time answering what I thought was some pretty easy, tame questions. So much so that unprepared for life. But what I felt, I eventually removed the episode because I recognized, and thankfully the person I interview recognized as well, that the interview didn't shine a very positive light on them, because it seemed like they didn't know what they were talking about in their field of quote unquote expertise. So, I think, like I said, part of sending the questions to the person, to the interviewee, is to allow them to feel comfortable and at ease during the interview and know what to expect and know what's coming. But also, if they're not very comfortable doing public speaking, or they haven't done a lot of recordings and podcasts or something like that, that they at least have something prepared for the questions that you're going to ask.
Yeah. In some ways, it's like a security blanket for them almost, where they've got that bit of comfort, and I sort of know where this is going, and that, like you said, they're prepared for it before it happens.
Yes, yeah. And sorry, Stone, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think I'm going to start adding illustrations to mine. now that we've had pictures on the questions for this podcast, that was brilliant.
For everybody listening, I sent out, I don't do actual questions, I just do like bullet points to hit, and then I send them out to the people that I'm talking to, and I doodle at the same time. So I'll put little pictures that are sort of about those shows, essentially. So I did a really, professional job of
it's beautiful.
of a portrait of Xander and Stone. Which
I love it. I think it's fantastic.
It's like a Van Gogh. If Van Gogh
really
if he was about 2 years old.
If I had a mantle, this would be hanging over it.
Well, one day when we're famous, that's going right onto eBay for sale. Like we're going to auction that off.
Absolutely.
But I was just going to add as well that I think one of the risks of there might be a risk to sending interview questions out to some of your guests as well, because they sometimes can sound a little too rehearsed when they're answering the questions. And you want that kind of natural feel of conversation. So what I do when I do send the interview questions out is I tell folks to read through them, to kind of wrap their head around them, but don't feel the need to go and like write out your answers or read your answers, because it could come across as very kind of cold and stagnant and rehearsed. So just kind of get an idea, prepare yourself mentally for the questions we're going to chat about, but there's nothing that you need to do in advance of the interview. You don't need to like write these answers down or anything like that.
Another difficult one is when they give you a time limit to do it within as well.
Oh yes, yeah.
they'll give you a time limit, so then they will rigidly stick to that list that you've sent them, because they've only got like that half an hour or 45 minutes, and you've got to get to that gap.
You're asking an unscripted question, and there's kind of just stunned silence on the other side, or like, I'm sorry, but that wasn't on the list, and I can't answer that question.
I've had to edit that out before.
Really? Has that happened, Marv?
That has actually happened.
I was kidding. Oh my goodness, really?
I went off on a tangent, and they were just silent, and it was like this long period of silence, and I had to I'm not going to say which episode it was, obviously, but there was this long silence, and I thought, next question.
Next question, just move on. They're like, I'm not prepared. I'm not answering that. I would have probably come back with like, this long silence is really chewing into our interview time. Could you just get to the answer, please? Your pregnant pauses are chewing into my time.
That's true. I need to get some. Yeah. So, the show music then, how did you find the show music?
I went and found that on a website called melodyloops.com. And you kind of go and tell them kind of the genre that you're looking for, or the feel that you're looking for. And it gives you a whole bunch of selections that you can make, either by genre, like rock or, blues or whatever it might be. Genre, you can tag it for the length of time you want the clip to be. You can tag it for the emotion that you want it to invoke. So happy, sad, excitable, those sorts of things. And then it offers you a selection of different songs. And it was like, I'd basically gone through just a list of hundreds and hundreds of different little sound clips and selected, I think it was about 5 that I selected in the end.
Yeah.
And then I played them, I shared them with Stone, and we were like, which ones do we like? And we both settled on this one. Like, we were like, when we heard this one, we're like, that's definitely the one that we want. In fact, we just spoke about this today, didn't we, Stone?
We did.
About our theme music. Yeah. What was it you were saying about it?
Oh, well, Schitt's Creek, SCHITTS, is a very popular show here, and it seems like it's made it globally. But one of the things I loved about it is that Storia had that same sense. But I think when you're listening to it, and we were both agreeing that you get that visual of ghosts in their big ballroom gowns, sort of dancing to it.
Yes,
it has that sort of feel to it, and it's ballad of Lost Chances, right? Is that the name?
Yes, that's Ballad of Lost Chances. Yeah,
and I thought that summed up a lot of my life.
But I think it also kind of invokes a kind of Addams Family grand ball type of it. It's got that sort of gothic kind of weirdness to it. It's a little
Tim Burton
piano waltz.
Yeah, a little Tim Burton.
It's got a bit of a Tim. There we go. It's got a bit of a Tim Burton vibe to it. Yeah, yeah.
You expect Jack Skellington to be down.
Yes,
any second he'll pop out.
Yes. So you went for that. You went for that rather than contacting Mark Snow and asking him if he could use an alternative to the X Files.
Well, funny story. We did have another song that sounded, or another track that was very X Filesy. Like very kind of modern techno type of music, and had kind of we actually, it's weird that you should ask this, Marv, because we had this conversation, Stone and I, just today, and we decided that one did have a bit more of an X-Filesy type of feel. And considering the different subject matter that we were going to be covering, it wasn't just going to be like UFO content, but we would be covering, like paranormal and cryptids and folk and all these different, big paranormal umbrella type of topics. We wanted something that kind of embraced all of those, subjects under one kind of track. no regrets. We've toyed, and I've asked before, like, do you think maybe we should change the theme music? Should we get something shorter? But I think we both just like it. And I know from my perspective now, like when I hear it, like I identify our podcast by that theme tune. Like that is our theme tune.
I always say no.
It's ours.
I'm very protective of this song.
You are. No. You are. And you should be. No. You should rein me in. Keep reining me in. You must.
We're not just changing it for change's sake.
It's a bit like if they took away that bass guitar from the transitions in Seinfeld.
I knew you were going to say Seinfeld. I knew it.
Yeah.
And what's part of your brand? Once you have those colors locked in and the artwork locked in and the music locked in, you kind of want to stick with it. Consistency.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sesame Street has got the Sesame Street theme. The 18's got that. That's consistent all the way through. You can't change it.
Yeah. True.
So what moments in your show's history so far would you say really stand out?
Goodness, big question.
I have an answer. we were
Go ahead, Stone.
I had researched my tail off on ball lightning. We were doing ball lightning, and we start to record, and then Xander and I get into a discussion about whether it's orbs or ball lightning. And he didn't feel like it was a paranormal topic. And so we went back and forth on this for a while, and he had pressed record. And so and we had such banter, and it was more us than we've ever been us. And so then we thought maybe we should lighten up on our show format and be more us. And so to me, that was my favorite episode, just because we really had fun with it, because for a lot of it, I didn't know I was being recorded. So it's very
surprise recording, surprise episode. I would have to totally agree with you about that. I was going to say something very similar. I think what stands out in our show history is, for me, the most is that we haven't been afraid to try different things and to identify what is working for us and what is not working for us. But at least we can say that we've tried it. So you'll hear like the sleep paralysis. If I go back and listen to episode 1, and I think it would be the same for any podcaster, or even anybody who makes a TV series or puts any content out there, that the first one, when you go back and watch it after you've gained, you've got a few more episodes under your belt, so you go back and you listen to your content or you watch your content, that you kind of almost cringe because you're like, oh God, did I really put that out thinking it was good? But I go back to our first episode, and there is so much like fresh energy and very high energy in that episode that it was something that I think, our listeners really enjoyed from the first episode, was this really, really like kind of unabashed energy that we had. And we were kind of, I'll say that we were all over the place, but still kind of maintaining on topic, but, going off on these little side tangents all the time. And then as I wouldn't even say we, because I was going to say
some of us were. Some of us were. I was trying to rein you in.
As we moved into later episodes, it started to get a little bit more serious, to the point of where we were almost taking the recording of the podcast too seriously, and we'd started to lose the element of fun in what we were doing. And then it started to feel. I wouldn't say it started to feel like taxing, but it started to feel like it was a lot more about work and a lot less about enjoying what we were doing. And then we got to that orb. I think that's where the peak of that came. That
was our breaking point.
Was with that was our breaking point. Yeah, with that orb ball lightning episode. And it was after that we were like, okay, well, look, we started out with this very fun kind of all over the place type of an energy. We tried moving it into something very structured and very serious and journalistic type of approach to it, and like really, really intensely researched, and don't move off the script and stick to the script, and and then we kind of lost that thing that made us, like that was, that made us who we are when we're podcasting. And then we got to that Palladian, the orbs and ball lightning episode. And it just kind of broke. It snapped in that moment. And I think we realized that we enjoy doing the podcast more, and we kind of identify more with our brand as a podcast when we're having a bit more fun with the podcast and not taking it too seriously. So I think just that would be my, like the looking back, that would be, I think, that the biggest thing that I've learned from doing this podcast, but also the thing that I kind of take away from it, or the lesson that I've, carried with me, is that as long as we're still enjoying what we're doing, and as long as we're still having fun, that we'll just keep going and we'll keep producing content.
Agreed.
Well, only in that sort of format would you have instances like in that sleep paralysis episode where Stone admitted to being grunty in her sleep. I told you I take notes.
I have so many great stories for my Tinder profile, as Xander says. Just throwing them all on the Tinder profile.
All on the 10.
I'm a real catch right now, just a real catch.
So, what other podcasts do you both listen to?
Go, Xander. You first.
Shall I go? Okay, so it's a terribly long list, Marv. So I don't really know where to start. But there's a few that I've been listening to. I kind of cycle through the different ones. I've got a very, very long list on my playlist of podcasts that I listen to. One of my most regular podcasts that I listen to is the Jim Harold Paranormal Podcast. He's like something of a podcast idol to me, or like a mentor type of thing. So I listen to the Jim Harold Paranormal Podcast a lot. I listen to his Campfire Podcast a lot too. Another one that I used that was actually the podcast itself is called The Strange Sessions. It's done by Kurt and Krista, who are in Wisconsin in the States. And they were who I loosely based, or who I kind of loosely kept in mind the format of their podcast, and how we kind of replicated what they're doing, but added our own kind of spin to what we do on the Xander and Stone podcast. So they had a lot of influence on me doing, starting a podcast. So the Strange Sessions, the Jim Harold Paranormal Podcast, and then there's another podcast called The Sideshow with Mel and Shauna. And the same host, Mel, also does another one called Tangential Downpour. And just through getting to know the hosts through social media and listening to their show, I think it's made a huge big difference in how I listen to the show, because I understand their humor from having spoken to them quite a lot. So I really enjoy their podcast as well. And then the other one I like quite a lot is called The Mika Hanks Show, which used to be called The Gralian Report, but now he's changed it to Mika Hanks. But that is really, really a very small selection of the ones that come to mind right now, because there are many, many podcasts that I cycle through. It just depends on what I feel like listening to on the day.
I can't believe you didn't say My Favorite Murder.
I do listen to it. I've not been up to date with My Favorite Murder recently. I've not been up to date with them, but I do still enjoy listening to them. It's just not where I am right now with true crime. I'm not into the true crime podcasts at the moment. And
mine are, again, keeping in mind the two full-time jobs I referenced earlier, and our long recordings take me several drives to, although we're shortening now, to get through. So I listen to us quite a bit, but also there's a podcast called Why You Should. Oh, just kidding. It's called Everything Is Alive, and it's where they interview inanimate objects. And Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend, which is of course comedy. Yeah, and then the Tim Ferriss Show, because I actually had talked to him several years ago on Twitter of all things, but he was just so nice and so engaging. So I ran across his podcast, and he does more of a self-development, businessy kind of interviews, and really impressive. So I love the Tim Ferriss Show.
So that's not the Tim Ferriss that was the guitarist in NXS then?
If he is, I was unaware.
I'm an NXS fan, so I shouldn't apologise for that. So
no, you shouldn't. NXS is great. NXS is great. Wonderful.
They are, yes.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give to podcasters starting out for the first time?
Stone, I'll let you take this one first.
I would say not to get discouraged, and that consistency is key. Stay consistent, And that sometime, well, I think after a show, you often have that letdown that comedians and actors and anyone in performance have, but don't let that sway you. We now know the science behind it, that it's all chemical based. It's nothing to do with your show. And the final thing is that you won't always agree if you have a co-host, and that's fine too. It's okay to have your little knockdown drag outs because it makes the show better.
It is. So there's a little bit of backstory in two of the things that Stone just said. So the first one about the that feeling of feeling deflated after you've done a podcast or just recorded an episode. And I think, I know this from being an actor as well, and having when you're out on stage and you're feeding off your audience's kind of energy. The minute the curtain goes down, you get what we call the post-production blues. It happens either after you've been on stage and for the rest of the night you're feeling a little bit like, deflated and de-energized. But it also happens once a production that's been running for a while comes to an end and you feel kind of like a bit of a lost soul because you don't know what to do with yourself. And, in the acting circle, we call that the post-production blues. But this was something that, after we record and just before I start editing, I'll often say things to Stone like, I don't know if we were very good on that episode, or we might have to do that again. I felt like I was very flat, or I'll kind of have these like moments of doubt where I feel like the production that we've just done or the episode we've just recorded could have been better. And I noticed that it kept coming up. So one of the things that I started to do was after we record to give myself a day or two before I start editing, because, just to kind of forget about the recording and the energy of the recording that we had just done, so that when I do go to edit it, I'm kind of listening to it with fresh ears almost. And I had said it so many times that Stone actually eventually went, I don't know if you went and looked it up or if it was just something you already knew, Stone, but there is actually a scientific explanation behind why actors feel that way when they walk off a stage, or a comedian feels that way when they walk off stage, or why podcasters might feel that way once they stop recording an episode. And it's got to do with your dopamine release. Isn't that right, Stone?
Yeah, and oxytocin. It's a chemical nightmare, basically, right after.
It's similar to they try to do it as well in the music industry, where you'll do the actual recording of the music, and then you'll come back at a later date to mix it, so you come into it with fresh ears, and you're listening to it differently in a way, and you might notice things that you liked when you recorded it, but then listening back to it in the studio at a later date, you'll hear things.
Like, that's shit.
Actually, that's shit. Take that out. And it's a good idea. I mean, I do the same with a show for most of the time. I will record this show, and then I won't actually edit it until a later date, because, like you said, you come to it with fresh ears. Yeah.
And it actually just reminded me of something that Stephen King wrote about in his book On Writing by Stephen King. And his part of his writing process and part of the advice that he gives to writers, and I think it would apply to podcasters as well, is that never edit while you're writing. So it like really trips you up if you think like, okay, well, we could do that better. We can do that again. Let's just do that one more time. And also that when he edits his books, he'll write his first draft, then he'll stick the first draft in a drawer, and he says that the magic number is 6 weeks. You have to wait 6 weeks before you go back and read your first draft and start editing it and refining it into a second draft. And obviously, I think 6 weeks is a bit long to wait to edit a podcast episode, but it is generally good advice, and it seems to be something that anybody who works in the creative, works in the creative arts or in a creative discipline seems to suffer from this. And I'm sure if you've got somebody who paints portraits on, maybe they need to walk away from the portrait for a day or two and come back and look at it with fresh eyes. I know it's true for writers.
Let the paint dry.
Let the paint dry, damn it. Let the paint dry.
It's a metaphor.
Yeah. And then the other thing that you'd say there, Stone, is about sometimes co-hosts, we might butt heads about something. And I think that, again, it's something that is true in any of the disciplines, whether you're an actor or a dancer. Whenever you've got two creative people working together, it's inevitable that you're going to maybe have opposing ideas, or think things should be done in a different way, or want to approach things from a different angle. And suddenly the emotions start getting a little bit heightened. Sometimes things get said that maybe shouldn't have been said in the moment. And I think, I know that it's happened. I've seen on, Google and things like that, that it's happened with lots of very famous shows that have lost their co-host for whatever reason, and the show never really recovers from it. So I think one of the things, especially if somebody's starting out a podcast for the first time and they're starting it with a friend or they're starting it with a co-host, is to remember that there are going to be moments where it's going to be difficult for either you to work with them or for them to work with you. I know for Stone, it can be very difficult to work with me sometimes.
That's not true.
Come on. You're being coy. But it's. I think what's important though is to remember that you're both doing it for the benefit of the show. So if Stone comes with one idea and I come with a different idea, and those ideas maybe clash with each other, what you have to keep in mind is that you're both coming with ideas that are there to benefit and to promote your show and to improve your show. So whatever it is that you're coming with, just keep in mind and bear that in mind, that whatever it is, you're looking for it to improve what you're already doing, not to undermine what you're already doing.
It's your baby, and you're just being good parents. Yeah. So
there we go. We're the best parents. We're the best.
We're good parents. Sometimes mommy and daddies fight, but for the good of the podcast baby, you got to keep going.
I think it's more interesting when you have a show like that where, it could be a bit boring if the people who are hosting it or in the show are always on the same page. In a way, it's almost like, because people listening to the show are coming from, they're all different people. So you sort of reflect that as the way that you are, where, a lot of the time you might both say, yeah, and agree with each other at certain points. And then you'll bring something in where the other person hasn't thought of that option, or you don't necessarily agree with it, but that's what makes conversation in the real world.
True that, yeah, true, definitely. True.
And in our first episode, we said no religion, no politics,
and then we proceeded.
I think we had already said we'd keep it clean. And then 10 minutes in, I was like, okay, this is a different show than I was anticipating.
And then once you're in that deep with either insulting or talking about touchy subjects. There's no point in backing out. You've just got to completely immerse yourself in it. So once you're in, you're in, now you can't stop. Now you just got to keep going. If you're going to insult one person, you're going to have to insult all of the people.
That's good comedy right there.
I've got a very long list of apology letters that I need to write to most of LA and most of Hollywood. Steven Spielberg right at the top of that list at the moment. For the things that we've said on the podcast.
I think we could probably do a three episode series on Xander just reading his apologies. The apology tour with Xander.
Yeah.
But then I think that. Sorry, Marv. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say it made me laugh when during one of the shows I listened to, Xander said something about we'll forget all of the something to do with the Catholic Church or something. I can't remember which one it was, but one of the episodes he said, "Oh, we'll skip the whole Catholic Church and the sex thing and everything or whatever it was." And you just carried on and you left that there, and that bit made me laugh because it's like you are sort of saying something about it, but by saying I won't say something about it, but you haven't.
Sometimes not saying anything is saying everything, right? Sometimes silence speaks a lot louder than words.
Xander thinks he's subtle.
Nuanced. I'm nuanced and subtle.
No, but I'm glad that we didn't go with the puritanical version that I thought we were doing at the beginning, because it really is. There's a freedom to it, and I think a lot of the energy is because there's a freedom to it. So I'm glad that Xander just went for it. Just went for it. It worked. It worked.
Is it that somebody said once, no comment is a comment in itself?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. But I think also one of the other pieces of advice I would give to a new podcaster as well, and this one is unfortunately learned the hard way, and again, I accept full responsibility for this. You read it, and I should have paid attention to what the internet says. When you're launching a new podcast, one of the biggest pieces of advice and consistent pieces of advice that they seem to give you is to make sure that you've got 3 or 4 episodes ready for your launch day. And I get terribly excited about things that I'm doing, and I get kind of carried away. And so we'd recorded one episode, and I think, before Stone had even kind of hit end call on the recording of the episode, I had already uploaded it. I was so raring to go. So immediately after recording, I just edited and uploaded. And what you end up with is constantly chasing basically under constant time constraint, because you're recording, editing, releasing, recording, editing, releasing, recording, editing, releasing. And if if you're sick, or if somebody can't make it one week, you're basically left without an episode. So what you really want to do is you really want to be ahead of the episodes that you're releasing. You want to have a few recordings in the bag, release, let's say 3, and have another 3 that are waiting to be released at later dates, because otherwise you are playing a constant game of catch up, and you're constantly racing the clock on recording and editing.
So what really happened
the truth of the matter
is I went to sleep with Xander saying we'll have 4 before we launch. And when I woke up, there was a series of stream of consciousness sort of text messages that said, I really just want to publish it. I'm thinking about publishing. Okay, it's too late. I've already done it. I was like, yeah, because of our time zones, I wasn't even awake.
There's
and I woke up to
do.
his thought process, and he's like, it's done.
There's nothing you can do about it now.
Done.
But I must say that it is the biggest mistake I think that I made in releasing the podcast. And it's one of the things that I do regret, is not listening to that advice and having 3 or 4 episodes in the bag for release, because you do end up really working against the clock when it comes to things like editing and being able to release episodes on time. So new podcasters, pay attention to that little nugget of wisdom that every single website about podcasting tells you.
This is our 3rd episode today, in fact. It is. We recorded 2 episodes, and now we're on this one. So, and that is the exact reason we're trying to bank them again.
We'll stop filing episodes.
Sorry, what was that, Mark?
You're stockpiling episodes.
We're stockpiling, saving them for a rainy day.
And I'm very fortunate to work with Xander in that he is, all the hard work that he described is the part that he does. So I have the easy part of the gig. So it's much more difficult to stockpile when you have all the editing that Xander has to do on his own.
I would say that, like, I've got the manual labor hard part of it, and I think your most challenging part of the podcast, outside of showing up and being awesome and amazing and charismatic, is putting up with me. Reining me in.
No one can rein you in.
No one, but you do try. Bless, you do try.
I do try. It's like American prude.
Well, England was the land of the prude.
Oh no. We had the Puritans. Very restrictive.
What's the old saying? No sex, please. We're British. So where can people find out more about yourselves and the show?
Well, of course, we're on every single podcatching app that's out there. So we're on Apple and Spotify and Podchaser and pretty much anywhere that people listen to their podcasts, even on some that you might never even have heard of. I get a kind of bee in my bonnet sometimes, and I go on Google and I look for like different podcasting platforms. So we're on a few in some unusual places, some with names that I just don't know how to pronounce, but you can find us there as well. So regardless of what country you're in, go and look on your local podcast app. You can probably find the Xander Stone podcast. But of course, you can also go to our website, which is www.xspodcast.com. And that's where you'll find all the latest updates on our episodes. You'll find information about our guests. You'll find even information about the hosts.
Great. Anyway, thank you both of you for talking to me today.
Thank you for having us on the show.
Thank you for having us on. It was very nice to meet you today.
It was great. You too. I've enjoyed this a lot. And thank you to everybody for listening, and hope you listen again to another episode of Pods Like Us.
Now, Stone, I know that you have had experiences of shadow people. So if you're okay with telling the listeners about that, would you mind going ahead and sharing some of your shadow people experiences?
Well, now I think it's just 5G, so they were probably testing 5G in it.
You might be, maybe the government's following you around because the government has got those secret, sound wave weapons as well. So maybe you're being targeted by the government.
I think so. They're like, how can we mess with her this week? Let's give her another story to tell.
It's the Scientologists.
Nobody will believe her if she has too many different stories. This is the most logical. I had never thought of that. This is the most logical explanation. If she has too many experiences in too many different genres, then I'm discredited, right? So it's genius on their part.
There we go.
So my son was 8 or 9, I think 9. Not that it matters, but it gives you a timeline. So I was seeing this little mouse run across the house, and I was so convinced about this mouse. And I would move furniture. I was trying to find where this mouse was because I kept seeing it scurrying across. And my boyfriend didn't believe me. So I put out 2 pieces of cheese and waited because I thought, surely it'll take a bite and then I'll have evidence that there's a mouse in this house. And it just sounds like a bad children's book at this point. but after 2 days, I noticed there were like little beads of condensation. I had cheese sweat on my, and he and I agreed that it was probably time to move the cheese. That at this point, either it was a very full mouse or the mouse didn't exist. And so I had been talking to this shaman who was Native American, and I told him about the experience. And he said, when you start seeing shadows, the other side's opening up to you. And often they do it in very small ways. And then as you start to accept it, the shadows get larger. And I kind of dismissed it. I thought it was, it's a nice story, but sure. And so then the next apartment that my son and I moved to, I kept seeing what appeared to be a cat. So I had a mouse and a cat. This is so
not at all a cliche on their part. Shadow people are very cliche, from a mouse to a cat. It sounds like, what's that nursery rhyme? There was an old woman who swallowed a fly, and then she sends in something bigger and something bigger. My God, that nursery rhyme is about shadow people. That's what's happening.
I had no idea.
Yeah, that's what that's about.
That one never made sense to me until now. It's all coming together. If only, the shadow cat was in the same house as the shadow mouse, but they didn't line up. So it was 2 different locations. And so one day I was talking to my son, and I moved my head. I darted my head real quick. And he said, "Oh, did you see the cat?" And I said, "Yeah, I saw the cat. Did you see the cat?" Like I was just, so it was so nice to have validation of the shadow because I hadn't told him. And then we moved in to the next house. And in the next house, I saw people going up and down the stairs. And because it was a fairly new relationship, I didn't want to bring it to his attention that I was sick. These are always difficult things to bring up. And I don't tell most people until now. Now everyone's going to know. But
this is giving me a flashback also to our sleep paralysis episode, where it was something that you don't bring up on a first date or put on your Tinder profile. Can you imagine what that has sleep paralysis, likes to grunt at night, sees shadow people, swipe left, swipe left.
Yes, right. Has alien experiences, used to live in a haunted house. Sure. Yes. I'm going to be a big hit on all dating sites if I go full vulnerable. So I kept seeing, and I was seeing one specific one who had a hat on. And I know when we discussed that earlier, you said that was a common one. And it's interesting because these things happen to me. And then I guess I just started accepting it. And I really should research it more, because after you said that, I feel like I did at the time. And maybe because there's more stories now, I just hadn't revisited it, because now it's that hat,
the hat
varying
man.
Hats is everywhere. So I don't know how I'd missed that. But anyway, I finally went to Sean and I said, I keep seeing something walking up and down the stairs. And after a few drinks, and I felt more like I could share. And he said, "Me too." And then we both agreed about the hat, and that even to the height, and that he was sort of lanky, and that it wasn't a bad energy. It wasn't something that either of us were concerned about. And we nicknamed him the caretaker, because we said, "Oh, he's just taking care of the family, not a big deal." And so we went about our business. But then later, it was sort of like a portal was opened, and all kinds of different shadow activities started happening at the house. And we felt like it was uncomfortable, like it was not great energy. the other ones, not the caretaker. And interestingly enough, one by one, the kids that ranged from ages 8 to 17, they started coming to us about seeing these shadows. And they wouldn't talk to each other about it. So we had to just go along and be like, oh, everything's fine. Everything's okay, because we didn't want them freaking out. And at one point we we saged the entire house. We went through the inside and outside with the family. And we said, we're just blessing our new home because we're all living together, and tried to make it about that, not about the shadow people. And so we had a couple of nights where no kids were knocking on our door. But then after that, of course it came back. And so we moved. And when we moved into the new house, his daughter, who was 8 and didn't really have the words, I guess, to put it into words, but she said, I really like this new house. There's not so much. And she used our hands to make sort of a really frenzied hand motion. And she said, it's just, and she put her hands out like calm, like safe on a baseball, like calm. And we knew exactly what she was talking about. The whole energy had shifted there.
Okay.
All right. I'm just waiting. I've sent the link to Stone. She is definitely up and about. Okay. So she's logging in now.
Okay.
How are you, sir? How's your day been?
It's been okay. How was all of your day? Because you're now close to bedtime, aren't you, really?
I'm speaking to you from the future, yeah. No, it was a good day. It was a productive day. Got a lot done. Recorded 2 episodes. Worked on a trailer for my new podcast that I'll be doing. General podcasty type of stuff.
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
It's amazing how long it takes to do.
Oh, my goodness. It has become a full-time job.
Yeah, it has, especially the editing. It's so.
I was having just exactly this conversation a couple of hours ago with a friend of mine in New Zealand, and saying that it might actually be high time to consider outsourcing the editing process, because it is so time consuming.
Yeah, because how many people contact you on Instagram and all these things, and they'll say, if you want us to edit your show for you, we'll do it for you.
Yeah, right. I've tried one of them before. In fact, I don't think it was through Instagram. I think it was through one of those freelancing websites like Fiverr or freelancer.com or something. And it was an editor somewhere in Asia. And his English seemed pretty decent. So I was like, okay, at least he'll understand what he's editing. And I gave it to him. And his turnaround on the edit was, I'm talking within the hour. I was like, that is just far too quick. And then when I went and listened back to the episode that he said that he had edited, I ended up editing his edit. So I was like, maybe a little once bitten, twice shy. So I'm a bit reluctant with these guys that contact you on social media, especially for things like editing or the podcast promoters. You must get a lot of those too, right?
Yes, I get a lot of those as well.
Yeah. And I mean, that will promote your podcast and get organic listens for you on all the different platforms. And I've seen in some other podcasters like review sections where you can actually see that they've paid a promoter because they've got like a massive, massive influx of reviews, like 5-star reviews, all on the same day. About 20 of them happen on the same day. And then there's huge gaps in between on either side of it. And they're generally very broken English or just what I call keyboard smashing, where it's just like a random selection, like letter soup, with a 5-star review. Yeah. So I don't put too much stock or faith in the podcast promoters.
Yeah, like reviews that might say, "Oh, I did this recipe of blah 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 blah," and all this.
Yeah.
Then you think to yourself, yeah, but the show's all about Marvel films. What's that got to do with your recipe?
What's it got to do with your
just random crap that people type?
What's your grandma's butter cookie recipe got to do with anything? I've seen what, like, and also I know some folks don't really go into like very in depth when they do leave reviews for people. I know from my side, when I review a podcast, I try and be as sincere as possible about it. So I actually do go and listen to episodes before I leave the review. But they're generally like really 3-word sentences like "is great podcast" or "I like to listen" or something like that.
Oh, I thought Stone's first name was Stone for some reason because of it.
No, it's Jenna.
I realised.
No, it's Jenna Stone.
So do I call you Jenna? Oh, crikey! Hello. I will give you the proper English. Hello.
Hello.
Oh, dear me. How is it in the past?
I will let you know when I wake up. I think I have about 12 and a half minutes before that really happens. Did you tell him? Did you tell him we recorded last night? All the way up into this morning?
Well, I was having the conversation about me recording today. So for you, it was last night.
Yeah.
Somewhere out there, it'll be
2 a.m. 2 a.m.
Yeah, it's tomorrow for someone somewhere. But I like that we're representing like all 3 time zones across the world right now: morning, noon, and night. I think that's great. We've got breakfast, lunch, and supper. Morning, noon, and night.
I could call a friend in Australia, and then we're all the way. Then, aren't we? Really?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
I could get my friend in New Zealand on. He's a good 5 hours ahead of us.
Yes.
He's already in tomorrow.
It is tomorrow over there. Yeah.
It is. Or Fiji. We need to find Fiji. Fiji's always the first one on the New Year's Eve countdown. Fiji's always the first place that New Year's happens. So we need to find a podcast in Fiji.
Is it that? Isn't there where Eastern and Western Samoa are almost 24 hours between each other or something?
Are they really? I didn't know that.
I think I remember that as a fact. So one side of it is in one time zone and one's in another, but because of the way that the word, and it's around Australasia there where it changes, isn't it? Where it goes, where the line is. So I think one of them is the day before, a whole 24 hours before. If you go over this line, you'll be in tomorrow.
That's crazy.
4 hours later. Yeah.
That's crazy.
I forgot where I read that. But
I know that with the size of like how big China is, that there really should be more than one time zone in China, but there aren't because #communism. So there's one like uniform time across the entire country, but it is actually big enough to warrant having multiple time zones. They just decided not to, just to make. But honestly, it makes things a little bit easier.
yeah, well, yeah, that's true. Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, it must be terrible in some countries like, America, you've got 4 time zones, is it, in America?
Yes.
Well,
we have, yes. my time
says yes.
Well, my time zone is Arizona is the only one that doesn't change times. So it's MST, so that's our little pretend 4th one, but we don't change. It doesn't matter. Oh, wait,
you mean like you don't do daylight saving time? You
yes,
don't do that
there it is. Thank you, Xander, for the words.
Yeah, I know. Don't worry. I'm here for you.
We're really sorry. We know you're having your breakfast right now.
I'm
just prying one eye open at a time, making it happen.
I know that there is. I don't know where in. I actually thought it was in Arizona, but it might be in Nevada. But I know it's one of the drier states. I think it is anyway. Where dusty and dry.
Sure.
But where they've got where there's a bridge that runs over a canyon, and halfway across the bridge you actually cross into a different time zone. So no matter how long it takes you to drive over the bridge, it always takes you an hour because you cross a time zone into a different, like an hour behind when you cross over the bridge.
That's probably Nevada.
Yeah, it sounds like Nevada. Sounds like the sort of shenanigans that pull.
Fool's Russian kind of thing happening there. Did you see that movie, that good that good rom-com? I know you're a big rom-com guy.
Huge.
Welcome
she throws the coin.
Film review.
My favorite rom-com.
And today we'll be talking about French Kiss starring Meg Ryan.
or Xander's favorite sports movie, Clash of the Titans.
So there's a backstory there, Marv. We somehow got into the topics of talking about movies today when we were doing an episode on cryptid creatures like the Kraken.
Okay.
And it turns out there's a movie called The Clash of the Titans, and I was like, it sounds like a football movie. It's not really up my alley. Turns out it really isn't. I'm not really one known for my sporty attitude.
Made the mistake of asking about that last night.
I've made the mistake of only listening to 2 episodes. So,
Which two?
I'm trying to listen to them all so that eventually I'm up to date and I'll just keep watching. So I've listened to, although saying that I skipped one. So I listened to the first episode. What is it about? Sleep paralysis.
Sleep paralysis. Yeah.
And then I went to the one about the very interestingly named Johannes Kuntius.
Yes, Mr. Johannes Kuntius, the real vampire of Petch.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and I've got all my notes in front of me for those shows.
Oh dear. Oh goodness. Oh, no. It's been such a long time now that, and in fact, it hasn't been so long, but we've done so many topics in between that they all, in fact, it's one of the things that I think Stone and I, we kind of sometimes struggle with when we're recording, is we can't remember whether an episode that we've released, if we can reference that in a recording that we're doing today, or if that episode that we mentioned, that thing is only going to be released at a later episode. And it starts to get very blurry, where you're like, I don't know if what I'm saying right now is completely out of context. Like, it gets very, very blurry sometimes.
Yes,
that just happened, in fact.
Just happened. It's happening right now.
Yeah. It is happening right now. I've got an episode coming out on Monday that was recorded at the end of November.
Okay, yeah.
So, yeah. Putting the curtain open for people to see now. Yes, you lose track, yeah.
Yeah. Marv, if you don't mind me asking, where in the UK are you from?
I'm from Nottinghamshire. So,
okay. And is that anywhere close to Darlington?
You're going to make me look for Darlington now.
Darlington, I know, is close to Yorkshire.
So, where is Darlington?
My mum's from Darlington. That's why I'm asking.
Okay. Let's have a look. Darlington to Newark. I might even add this in the post-credit sequence so that people can listen to what people talk about. It's 2 hours and 5 minutes away, 120 miles.
Okay. Oh, 120 miles.
That's just it's a little walk. That's a little
jump.
It's funny thinking that, because both countries that you're in, America, the US, and China, I mean, they, in this country, you'll say, oh, I've got so far to travel. I've got to travel from here to there. It's going to take this long. And then you think, yeah, but in the US or China, you get people that travel for like, oh, I'm going to go and see my mum. It's only 1,000 miles from this state to that state, or from this region. Oh, I'm going from the Mandarin to whatever of China, and it's only this short period.
my family my dad lives 2,600 miles away.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a hike.
Miles. I can never figure out miles. How many football fields is that? How many McDonald's buckets is it?
They featured it in Clash of the Titans. I'm sure you can research it there.
They laid all the measurements out there.
Hey, I was correct. I gave it a goog, and it's the Hoover Dam is where the time changes, and that is where she throws the coin over. All of my geography is learned through rom-coms. Go team, Hoover Dam. So Nevada.
I was going to say in China, when you talk about something being 2 hours away, the size of the city that I live in, and it's still considered to be a medium-sized city on Chinese terms, it takes more than 2 hours to travel across the city that I'm in. It is just it's an absolute expanse. So 2 hours for me is like, getting to the other side of the city to that lovely place that sells those great, whatever, duck or whatever it might be. So yeah, distance is relative.
Yes, my brother, when he was working in Yokohama in Japan, he was telling me how long it takes to travel from one side to another. And he tells me wonderful stories of going from one end of Japan to the other using the Shinkansen trains. Yeah, as well.
Well, we've got the mag rail now. We've got the speed train, so you can get all over China on the bullet train a lot faster. You can go from the north of China in Beijing, which is the city right next to where I am, all the way down to Hong Kong, and I think you can do that in the bullet train now in about 5 hours, which is about the same as it would take you to fly. And they're developing, or they have developed, and I'm not sure whether they've started running it yet. But I think it might just be an urban myth, because I can't even by physics wrap my head around how this would work. But it's a bullet train that goes from Beijing to Shanghai. Beijing to Shanghai by air would take you about, what is it, Stone, about 2-3 hours to fly there?
Yes.
Yeah, accurate. It takes about 2-3 hours to fly there. there's a bullet train now that gets you there in 30 minutes. It's something like 1,800 kilometers or something like that, and it gets you there in 13 minutes. That is, I don't know if we should be messing around with that type of physics. Like, that's going to open wormholes and shit. Like,
that's only if the helium balloons don't get tangled up, though.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
As long as the parachute opens when you're trying to stop, then you'll be fine. I'm always a little bit wary about these big things that we try to accomplish as humans, because all you have to do is look at like the Hindenburg blimp, the biggest blimp, and that went and damn exploded, didn't it, and killed everybody. The biggest ship, the Titanic, that sank. And now we're coming up with the fastest train that travels 1,800 kilometers in half an hour. Not a good idea, guys. Not a good idea.
If the Tower of Babel.
That couldn't cause any problems at all, could it?
No. I mean, if they just suddenly break, everybody's going to be like pancake batter on the front wall of a train. Like, it's not going to be good.
Edinburgh to London in about 30 seconds on that.
Yeah, it's crazy fast. But again, like, it's when I read about it on the news, and there's always a lot of fake media going around on social media these days. When I read about it, I was just like, yeah, I don't know about that. Like 30 minutes seems a little too fast. Like, that's like faster than the speed of sound. That's crazy. I say that with no scientific basis or any knowledge about how fast the speed of sound is.
Your conversation would still be taking place when you arrived.
Yeah, exactly. You wouldn't even finish your sentence.
And when the sound finally caught up to you, you'd be like, oh, that was the punchline. Got it.
Imagine you've stepped off the train in Shanghai, and you just hear the announcement in Beijing that the train is now leaving for Shanghai. And you're like, what the
hell? Yeah. Hashtag science.
I think I should apologise to Jenna for the picture that I've got of her on my notes. Perhaps. What do you think?
I love that picture. I was going to hang it on my refrigerator.
We were going to make it our album art for our podcast. We were like, that's the one. We searched for album art. We tried for a very long time. We're like, where was Marv when we needed him?
That's right.
Genius. Sure. I was going to tell you that I'm a big fan of your art. Big fan.
I don't know why I do that with all of my notes. I'll put like little pictures and things. There's film ones where I've got like there's one where I've done where it's like the front of a cinema, and I can hear myself here.
I'm hearing an echo from me as well.
I can hear both of you.
Xander's absolutely perfect.
Is the set?
Yes, so I put all these little like pictures and things. So anyway, I think we ought to start the show officially now. Probably. That's okay. I was enjoying the general chat there.
It's pretty much how most of our episodes go.
We'll get into that. So, okay, how was that?
And cut. Awesome. Thank you, Marv. Thank you. That was fun.
Thank you. That was.
I don't know if you know about the structure that I use, because I do have a sort of structure-ish, where I record the entire conversation from the beginning of the call all the way through to the end.
Mm-hmm.
And then post-credit music, we have there are bits that I take out of the pre and post-show chat that I think might be quite interesting and fun.
Oh, great!
I should have warned you of that before.
Now I'm trying to remember what I even said.
But
I was still waking up.
I'm like, oh Jesus, Xander, what did you say?
Well, people will definitely understand time zones after that.
There will be no confusion.
Anyway, thank you both so much. That was lovely. It's really nice.
Loads of fun. Thank you, Marv.
Lots of fun. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You two both take care, and
yes, sir.
Stone, go and get yourself a nice cup of coffee and some breakfast.
Will do. Thank you.
Take care.
Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.